Okay, in section 1.2, we're mainly going to graph equations by finding x and y intercepts. So let's review. An x-intercept is a point on the graph where the y value is 0. So to find an x-intercept algebraically from an equation, you just let y equal 0 and you solve for x. And to find a y-intercept, you just replace the x with 0 and solve for y. So first, let's just look at a couple of problems and just to find their x and y intercepts. Let's say we have y equals negative 3x squared plus 12 for the given equation, and we want the x and y intercepts. Well, the x-intercepts, I'll let the y become a 0, and then I will factor a GCF of negative 3. Set each factor, if I can, equal to 0. Of course, negative 3 is just a number, cannot equal 0. So I set x squared minus 4 equal to 0. Move my 4 over, take the square root of both sides, and I get x equals plus or minus the square root of 4, which is plus or minus 2. So my x-intercepts are 2, 0, comma, negative 2, 0. And to find my y-intercept, it's fairly easy. I just replace the x variable with 0, so I'd have negative 3 times 0 squared plus 12. That would be 12, or as an ordered pair, 0, 12. So in my math lab, if it asked for the intercepts, I would write all three of these as an ordered pair with a comma in between each parentheses. And then it's going to ask you to graph it. Now, if you have a square in the problem, you first have to select the correct tool from the tool palette. So you would select the one that looks like a U-shaped curve, because when the square is on there, it's going to make it a curve. And it's going to ask for 3 points. Now, how you would do this, you would just, first you select this from the tool palette, and then you're going to move, using your mouse, you will move the cursor to one of the 3 points. Say you moved it to this one. You will right-click. Then you will move the cursor to the second one, right-click. To the third one, right-click. And then you must press Enter. After you have right-clicked on each coordinate, press Enter, and then save. And when it will take you back out to the regular problem, and then you, of course, check Answer. Now, one little tip here. After you have placed your 3 points by right-clicking, you can double-click on any one of the 3 points to edit its coordinates. So once you have placed those on there, before you press Enter, or maybe even after, but I know you can double-click on each coordinate and you can actually change by typing it in right there on the graph. Alright, so now let's look at, let's say, a linear equation, and let's find its intercepts and talk about graphing it in my math lab. So let's say we have 3x minus 2y equals 6. I know it's linear because there are no squares on the x or the y, or no cubes or powers. So it will be a line, and the correct tool I will click from the tool palette will be the straight line. So to find the x-intercept, I'll let the y be 0, so I'll have 3x minus 2 times 0 equals 6, which becomes 3x equals 6 divided by 3, and I get x equals 2, which is 2, 0. To find the y-intercept, I'll let the x become 0 and solve this equation for y. Negative 2y equals 6. I divide both sides by negative 2, and I get y equals negative 3. So in my math lab, when it asks for the intercepts, I would write them both as ordered pairs, 2, 0, 0, negative 3. Then it will ask you to graph it. If it does, you will need to first select the correct tool from the tool palette. So you would select the line, and then it's only going to require 2 ordered pairs since it's a line. And you would just move the cursor to the first one, click, move it to the second one, click, then press Enter. Press Enter on your keyboard, and then save. Underneath the graph, you'll see the Save feature, and then you will check answer. And again, you can edit each coordinate by double-clicking on the actual coordinate on the graph before you leave the graphing screen if you need to. Let's look at one problem, which will really be more of a review of Algebra 2 and graphing trinomials. Let's say you had a problem like this, and you're asked to find the x-intercepts, where you let the y be 0. You have to factor this into two binomials. And you remember for the first ones, you want the first two to multiply to give x squared, so it would be x times x. And the last two must multiply to give -6, but add to give -5. So I would need a -6 and a +1 because the product of these two numbers is -6, the last number, but the sum of those is the middle term, -5. That would be the correct factor. Set each one equal to 0, and we would get x equals +6 or x equals -1, which could be written as ordered pairs. It's just a little quick review, and if you don't know how to factor a trinomial, you can always find the x-intercepts by using the quadratic formula, which is x equals -b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac divided by 2 times a, where a is the coefficient of x squared, b is the coefficient of x, and c is the constant term. So on this problem, if we were going to use the quadratic formula because we had no idea how to factor, it would be x equals the opposite of -5 plus or minus the square root of -5 squared, and anything squared, remember, is always a positive, minus 4 times a times c divided by 2 times a. So we're here we get +5 plus or minus the square root. This will give a +25, and these two negatives make that a +24 added to 25 is 49. 49 has a perfect square root, so it comes outside the square root symbol. And then I would use 5 plus 7 over 2 to give 12 divided by 2, or 6, and 5 minus 7, -2 divided by 2, to give the -1 that we already found by factoring. So you have two choices to find x-intercepts on a trinomial, three-termed expression. You can factor if you know how, but if you don't, you can always use the quadratic formula. And last, we're going to look at graphing a problem where you have to solve for y. Let's say we had x equals y to the 7th power. Well, we wanted y equals, so to solve this for y, I have to take the 7th root of each side, because the 7th root of y to the 7th is just y. So this becomes y equals the 7th root of x. And then you will need to graph this, and probably the easier way to graph this one is going to be on the graphing calculator. And there is a calculator lab under in my math lab that you should find. It's called Calculator Lab 1, that will help you use the graphing calculator if you never have graphed with it. But just quickly, I will tell you, after you turn it on, you would type in y equals, and the 7th root of x, I would write it in this form. You would type the xt theta key to get your variable, and then you would do house top. And this is really raised to the 1/7 power. When you took Algebra 1 or 2, you learned how to write from square roots or roots to exponent form, and that is the same thing as x to the 1/7. So you can ask the calculator to raise x to the 1/7, and then just press graph, and it should give you the correct choice. You can choose from your multiple choice answers. Now another one that you may be asked to graph one like is like the square root of, say, 4x. And on this one, I would either use the calculator. If you do, there is an actual square root key on the calculator. It's behind the x squared. You could type it in, y equals, and you'll call up this symbol, and you put a parentheses, and make sure you put both terms that are under the radical inside a parentheses and press graph. If you don't know how to do that and you want to graph it by hand, you just need to make a chart of values where you'll put values in for x and figure out what the square root would be. So for example, if I put in a 0, the square root of 4 times 0 is 0. If I put in a 1, the square root of 4 times 1, or 4, is 2. If I put in a 4, I get the square root of 4 times 4, or 16, which is 4. I have to be very careful if I don't, or I could just put in like a 2, and the square root of 8 I would get from my calculator, a decimal for that. And then you could plot those and get the graph and then choose the correct multiple choice answer. The square root of 8 on the calculator, let me do that right quick, rounded off, is about 2.8. And you plot those points and you would get your graph, and again you could be able to select it from the choices given on in MyMathLab. So I've got 0, 0, 1, 2, 4, 4, and then I had 2, 2.8. It's this arc that goes like this. You can't put negatives in place of x because the square root of a negative number gives a non-real answer. So I had to start at 0 and go up. And we'll study that more in detail in the next chapter. So this should be enough notes to get you started in this section. And as you work through the problems in MyMathLab, be sure to use the Help Me Solve This and View an Example tab to the right of each problem. And if that fails you, then use the Ask My Instructor tab. And make sure you write in details what you're needing help with, and it will send a link to me, and I will get back to you with help.